This is live from New Delhi. You're watching special broadcast on India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Russia visit to participate in the 16th BRICS summit. India at BRICS is our special broadcast. I'm Sakal Bhatt. Coming up in next 2 hours, we'll get you all the breaking and live inputs from Kazan in Russia, and we'll also deep dive and understand and examine the overarching agenda of a BRICS summit under the chairmanship of Russia, and most importantly, significance of it when it comes to India and what all India brings to the table. So let's begin. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is attending the 16th BRICS summit in Kazan in Russia. The summit this year is quite a historic one as the old and new leaders of the expanded BRICS family, they came for their first photo op together earlier today. Leaders included that of Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia and the United Arab Emirates. They all attended the plenary session. The group now stands stronger and united together for an inclusive and a multipolar world order. The summit is themed strengthening multilateralism for just global development and security. Discussions are likely to revolve around three main pillars of cooperation identified by the chair, Russia. These include politics, security, the economy and finance, and cultural and humanitarian ties. Particular attention will be given to the potential expansion of BRICS through the proposed establishment of a new category of partner nations. The outcomes of these discussions will be summarized in the Kazan Summit Declaration. BRICS Plus outreach format meeting will also be convened today with representatives from nearly 40 countries in attendance. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be holding bilateral talks with the Chinese President Xi Jinping on the margins of the BRICS summit in Russia's Kazan today. That's on Wednesday, one of the important meetings that takes center stage as far as India is concerned. Now, the meeting comes close on the heels of Delhi, Beijing reaching agreement on patrolling arrangements in areas along the LOC. Listen in.
There will be a bilateral meeting held between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping 23rd of October on the sidelines of the BRICS summit.
Later in the day, the Prime Minister will be holding a bilateral meeting with the President of Uzbekistan, Shavkat Mirziyoyev. And let's now take a look at Prime Minister Modi's itinerary for the day today. That is day 2 of BRICS summit in Kazan. As we told you earlier, Prime Minister Modi is currently, as we speak, attending the plenary session that is underway, after which Prime Minister Modi is expected to attend the 2-hour-long second session, which earlier began at 14:30 IST. Thereafter, on the sidelines of the summit at around 16:40 hours IST, Prime Minister Modi is expected to hold a bilateral meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. The Prime Minister will then hold a bilateral meeting with the President of Uzbekistan, Shavkat Mirziyoyev. In fact, post-bilateral meets, a press briefing will take place at around 17:15 hours in the evening. And then at around 1800 hours, Prime Minister Modi will be departing from Kazan in Russia after concluding his 2-day Russia visit. Prime Minister Modi is expected to arrive in India at 23:30 hours later in the evening today. And before we go to the guests, let's also take a quick look at the special report by RT correspondents on BRICS and India's role in solving global issues.
Hello to India from our studio in the Russian city of Kazan. Of course, this is where the BRICS summit kicks off today. Last year, it was a group of 5. Today, it stands as a power of 9. Of course, New Delhi plays a key role in the alliance, and it's an alliance that's living, breathing proof of the growth of the multipolar world. BRICS is all about giving a voice to the previously voiceless, and the global south is just waiting to be heard.
Now, if we talk about BRICS in general, then a lot is on the table here. They're talking about further growth, strengthening economies, security, strengthening the BRICS Development Bank, and perhaps most importantly, creating an independent BRICS international payment system, perhaps all crucial for BRICS to play a crucial role in the multipolar world. Igor Piskunov, RT, reporting from Kazan.
Well, crossing live now to RT correspondent Runjan Sharma. Runjan, welcome to Tatarstan. Do you think that India could be a platform, a space for mediation, for negotiation?
There's no doubt there. You see, Saskia, how many countries in the world today have access both to Russia and to Ukraine? In fact, how many leaders in the world have been both to Russia and to Ukraine? Remember, after Narendra Modi's first visit this year to Russia, soon after that, he also went to Ukraine. There was a lot of speculation as to why he's doing that. But of course, when you look at it in this conflict, there has been few leaders who've spoken to both the countries, and Narendra Modi understands that it is India, it is the global south that is basically, it's impacted by the conflicts that the West is engaged in. When you look at it from that perspective, of course, India wants the conflict to end.
So what does the BRICS alliance mean in world terms? Well, as of today, the group accounts for 46% of the global population. Just so we understand, that's 3.6 billion people. It also unites 45% of the Earth's landmass, and of course, economically such a big player, representing more than 47% of global GDP. With the intake of new, very energy-rich members, it also brings 45% of the world's oil and gas reserves under its wings. Business, culture, geopolitics, finance, of course, fashion, even so much brings together the BRICS plus nations. And based on what we've been seeing and hearing, it looks like this group is in it for the long haul. That's for now. Goodbye from our beautiful special coverage studio right here in the heart of Kazan, just a stone's throw away from the world-famous UNESCO heritage site, the Kremlin.
And now let me welcome Professor Swan Singh, Foreign Affairs expert from JNU in our Delhi studio. I also welcome Ambassador Gurjeet Singh, former senior diplomat, joining us on the show. Namaste, sir. And we will be joined by Greg Simon in a short while from Sweden also. I would like to start with Ambassador Gurjeet, sir. What really do you make of the agenda areas identified by the chair Russia, considering the timings of this summit, Ambassador Singh, and so much so that it matters to Russia as to the rest of the BRICS members? But just to set the ball rolling, your opening remarks. The significance of this summit.
Significance of the summit is that it brings together a growing matrix of countries who together believe that the international order needs to be reordered to be more just and responsive to the global south. And in this, the original BRICS are the platform on which the future is going to be based. To me, that is the most important. Second part to this, if you see the agenda, and when we talk of look at the theme itself, multilateralism, and look at the different aspects coming up for discussion in the Kazan Declaration, things like having currency trading in local currencies, expanding your own trade, standing up to unilateral sanctions. So all these are important to make 3.6 billion people of the world live in a happier space. I think that idea that we can build a better world for countries of the global south with some of its partners is perhaps the dominant theme of this important BRICS summit, in which 4 new members will participate as full members for the first time.
Okay. Professor Singh, if I may bring you in here. Now, having said that, India's role in the current summit, considering this is taking place in the backdrop of Russia-Ukraine conflict, sir, and India has already offered multiple times a role of mediator. Yesterday also Prime Minister spoke about need of aid and assisting. In that situation where Russia is also looking at getting isolated, perhaps that's the parallel narrative, there is a signal to the West as well. You're looking at expansion at one side, you're looking at Russia trying to reach out to the rest of the world, and we're also looking at India being seen as a very important bridge between global north and global south. There's a lot that's going to transpire in this BRICS summit. Do you agree?
Surely, Sakal, it is taking place in the backdrop of this ongoing Ukraine crisis, which is where we saw that earlier the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi had proposed a 13-point peace proposal, which was clearly demolished by the Western world, saying that it's absolutely not acceptable. Then the West organized their own Swiss Peace Summit, where China and Russia did not join. India joined but did not sign the final communique. Compared to these two, I think India's approach of a very subtle, piecemeal, modest approach of communicating between two sides, with Prime Minister himself going to Moscow in July and then followed by his visit to Kiev. Now again he is in Moscow. I think that is a very subtle way of at least accelerating the possibilities of peace process, peace talks at some stage, and that seems to become increasingly credible for both sides, for Ukraine as well as for Russia, which no other initiative has achieved so far. What is also most interesting is that BRICS collectively, which is a grouping of economic powers, rising economies, has China, which is the second largest economy on the planet, but has India, which is right now fifth largest, but soon to be third largest, but fastest growing economy among these BRICS nations. And what makes India special here? Most of the BRICS members are seen, at least barring the new five, particularly the original five, are seen as countries that are not comfortable with the Western world. And in that, India is the only country which is as much comfortable with United States and European nations as it is with China, Russia and rest of the BRICS nations. So India's, I think, effort here also is to make sure that BRICS remains an organization which is not Western, it's different from Western organizations, but it is not anti-Western organization. And therefore focus should remain, as the theme says, on multilateralism, development and security. And they can do a lot in that sense. Why? Because right now energy, which is the driver of global development, about 45% of oil export is from countries of the BRICS, and largest importer, number one and number two of the world, China and India, are also in the BRICS. And they are talking increasingly of using local currencies, de-dollarization, which is what is making BRICS extremely, extremely attractive. So in Johannesburg, President Ramaphosa had said 43 countries had approached to join BRICS, and right now in Russia, 34 countries have joined, approached to join BRICS. That, I think, is something that really worries Western nations, that BRICS is becoming increasingly very attractive grouping, and India has a very unique position.
That was my next question. Unique position, Ambassador saying, unique position of India vis-a-vis bringing that counterbalance element to the existing world order under the Prime Ministership of Narendra Modi, who, by the way, has had one-on-ones with Vladimir Putin in the last 1 decade, I think 7 times, and this is the second in 3 months. So the kind of equation, chemistry bond whom the both leaders share, and the way India's global prominence has multifolded, in the last few years, that will, you think, find a resonance in this summit?
Thank you for sir. So, the advantage of a multilateral or a plurilateral summit is that it gives more opportunities.
All right, go ahead, sir. Okay, go ahead, sir.
Gives opportunities for our leaders to meet more often. So what is happening now is that leaders are not trying to mix up their bilateral summits only with attending multilaterals, but even going twice in a year to the same country to keep both the bilateral and the multilateral engagement going, using it as a plus rather than a simple add-on. I think that is important. Second point is India does this with important countries. And I think Russia is evidently important in this. Third point, I think, why I think Professor Swaran Singh pointed this out. So I would say India is taking BRICS on the line of being a Western, not anti-Western, pro-Chinese, but a Western, which means the developing and just order. That is what we are looking at. So we want this agenda to give greater space to our development requirements and hopefully that of the global south. And if we can work that out by the expanded BRICS, then certainly it gives a template to work it out with the G7. But that is where we are playing the fine line. And I think that perhaps at this stage, more than Brazil or South Africa, it is India among the original BRICS who is in a position to play this.
Okay, let me at this moment get in my colleague Jessica Taneja live from Kazan. Jessica, if you could hear me, what more information / inputs you could share with us? I believe the first plenary is underway, and when is our Prime Minister expected to speak? What all can you share with us, Jessica?
Well, right now we've heard from the Russian President Vladimir Putin, who had discussed the issue of
Okay, I think there is this freeze frame there. We're getting some connectivity issues sporadically. We'll try and fix that up. But just your thoughts on where Ambassador Gurjeet left.
I think what is most significant is simply to see the body language of President Putin, President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi.
Yes.
And the comfort and the warmth that you saw while Prime Minister Modi was meeting President Vladimir Putin. Yeah. Whereas in terms of conversations, India is fairly clear that it should not be seen taking sides of either Ukraine or Russia while it is trying to make peace between these two nations. And that is a very significant agenda, I think even now in this meeting for Prime Minister, to make sure that peace process moves forward and
you think
war
that's
comes
going
to...
to be discussed, specifically India's role of mediation?
I think India is going to discuss this issue not only now with President Putin, but I think that issue might come up even with President Xi Jinping's conversations with Indian Prime Minister.
In terms of crystallizing, I mean, India has had this position since last year and they've not budged, and we stand for peace and we are not taking sides.
Absolutely.
We are taking India's sides, but we are neutral. But do you think there is something concrete that could be expected vis-a-vis India's role here?
What happens, Sakal, in such situations, we might come to know what was happening several months later.
Yeah.
Because the very style of India's intervention is not do any grandstanding, not any brownie points.
Right, right.
The focus is to make sure in a very subtle fashion, without much glare of public media to create expectations, inch by inch move forward. And I think so far repeated visits of not just Prime Minister but also Foreign Minister, National Security Advisor is an incremental change.
Yes, incremental change. Let me take this to Ambassador Singh. Not grandstanding, Ambassador Singh, but a very nuanced position again taken by India, not only amidst Russia, Ukraine, but what's happening in Middle East, given the fact that Prime Minister Modi had a meeting with the top leadership of Iran yesterday.
That was very useful to meet the new president of Iran. And I think the fact that Iran is in the BRICS now gave us that opportunity. So, as I said, multilateralism has advantages and more advantages being taken. But this fine point that you are making about the unique position that India is in, I would like to add a nuance to it. Often, India is ekla chalo re. We are doing it alone. I mean, let's put it very clearly. The Russians and the Chinese are not with us on everything. For instance, if you talk in the theme about security, I mean, the biggest security threat to us is China. And China is trying to bring Pakistan into BRICS. So, security on security issues, for instance, there is no understanding among the BRICS. You look at the two new BRICS members from Africa, Ethiopia and Egypt, ready to go to war with each other. So it is not as if BRICS itself brings an understanding among its members. We have to look at the larger picture, that can the world be a better place without it falling prey to a US versus China bipolar. Now that is really a difficult act when China is a member of BRICS and also backed by Russia. So therefore, India's role, I think, is even more important. Right now, to an extent, Brazil is standing with us. But the South Africans, given the nature of their economy, I think are already finding the difficult. So therefore, all the members of BRICS are there for their own reasons, for themselves, hoping that they would all benefit from the theme of the summit. We hope that everybody will contribute to a better multipolarity, because for India, a multipolar order rather than a bipolar order is very important. And I think to most of the other countries in BRICS, now that is also an objective.
Okay, multipolarity of India is India advantage. At the same time, India's alignment with these aspiring nations and those who are already in the ambit of the expanded BRICS, especially Egypt, Arab and Iran. We've had a bilateral with them yesterday. So India's role in terms of aiding and navigating through difficult conversations that will come up, because each nation have, they have their own aspirations slash, things to look forward to.
That's right. Every nation will be guided by their own interests. But every nation also comes alive in terms of what is their essential character. India, right from the very beginning, even when we had difficulties at home, we were very global in our approach. We were very international. We were always part of all multilateral efforts. So in that sense, multilateralism is deeply ingrained in India's psyche, India's behavior. And President Putin is projecting BRICS summit meeting in Russia now as Russia's largest ever multilateral event, with 40 countries represented there. And remember, Russia, China, India are also seen as representatives of Global South now. So Global South also gets connected to Russia, China, India, though of course they all are pushing for Global South. Their strategies are slightly at variance from one another. So that is where I think meetings like this could also be an opportunity to find a kind of a common ground.
In fact, on the show we have one of the most eminent global voices on Russian and Europe matters, and I am joined by Greg Simons from Sweden. Let's also hear his views on this whole Russia angle. He is associate professor and specialist in Russian contemporary media and politics. Greg, thank you again. Thank you. Really appreciate your time. So the largest gathering of the world leaders in Russia in decades, and that too at a time when, Kremlin is locked in a war on Western-backed Ukraine. And here we are also looking at India's role as a bridge between the North, South and the West in BRICS. So your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, the world is getting an increasingly dangerous and volatile place. So BRICS and India have a central role in this.
Okay.
India has a role not only if we look at its geographic positioning in terms of its geography as being an important point in the world, but also if we look cognitively speaking, due to the philosophy on international relations and those human relations within that system. So you've got 2 points there. And of course, I mean, we need to look at why is the Ukraine war happening. And this, I mean, it's no secret. And I mean, US politicians and British politicians have been saying it. They are saying openly that this is the best value for taxpayer money that they have got so far. I mean, you've had Cameron saying this, you've had Lindsey Graham and so forth, because they say it's Ukrainians are fighting a war to contain and weaken Russia, and no American lives are being lost. So, I mean, this is the cynicism of not only this really toxic realism aspect of international relations, but I think more generally the approach of the global north, or this rules-based order, who see as a threat anything that challenges US hegemony, which is in decline anyway. It's no longer an absolute hegemony. And one can say that the relative hegemony is weakening further. Okay. And this is mostly due to their own actions, and I'd say hubris as well. So this is where...
So are you trying to say that the BRICS is already gaining the traction where they are being looked as challenging the US-led world order? Well, not India being part of that, because we have our own relationship with the US, and we don't believe in taking sides or getting into that confrontational situation. Very quickly, Greg, on that point.
Well, what is challenging BRICS itself is challenging this geoeconomic hegemony of the West, which is being used as a weapon against any country. It doesn't matter if it's part of the global north or the global south. So BRICS is instrumental in this, and this is why you're getting so much interest in countries, especially from the global south, seeking to join, and even those countries from the periphery of the global north, such as Hungary and so forth.
Okay, yes, Professor Singh.
I think I fully agree that the very economic heft of BRICS, even if it keeps focusing on not becoming anti-Western, does create anxieties in Western countries. For example, the whole report that you showed in the beginning about how much collectively BRICS stands for in terms of population, in terms of economy, it's already much bigger in population definitely, but even in economy much bigger than G7 nations that even today continue to control Bretton Woods institutions, whether it is World Bank or International Monetary Fund. And the voting weightage, which need to change over a period of time, they are very reluctant to allow newly emerging economies to get that kind of decision-making weightage in these international bodies. IMF is already always controlled by Europe. World Bank president is always an American citizen. What about China, which is about nearly 20 trillion economy now? From 2017, China is the world's largest donor country. So BRICS is projecting itself without appearing to be anti-Western as a collective which is becoming a glue of global south, and therefore an anxiety for Western nations, who sometimes also go as far as to do name calling of all kinds. But fundamentally the worry is that the global economic trends are going to be gradually going away from their control, and it seems that the global economic decision making, global financial trends, de-dollarization, use of local currencies is all gradually kind of creating a paranoia in the West that looks at BRICS from that angle. And now particularly you see President Erdogan is in Kazan also. He's a NATO member who's trying to join BRICS. ASEAN, which was created to block spread of communism and soft balance China, Malaysia, Thailand are trying to join BRICS. This obviously creates anxiety in the Western nations, but there is no denying that the attraction of BRICS is expanding like a wildfire.
But is there also this this underlining idea of Russia sending a message to the West, the messaging of it?
Indeed, Russia being denied any opportunity to engage with the global forums is treating this summit meeting as its kind of face-saving opportunity to organize a huge meeting where Russia is present and hosting it.
Yes. Can I have a quick view on this from Greg and then Ambassador Singh also, and then we can connect with our colleague Jessica. Ambassador Singh, you first. The messaging from Russia to the West, and Russia needs India as much as BRICS needs India.
Yeah. So Russia under sanctions and at war, which it is not winning easily, is in a problem. It can do with more friends. At that moment, you have the BRICS 9 plus perhaps 28 countries were part of the outreach, all coming to Russia. I think this meeting is bigger than the Russia-Africa meeting last year. So this, and it has a wider spectrum of countries. So I think this shows that despite the war, despite the sanctions, countries are ready to visit Russia, and despite the ICC warrants and all that, countries are quite happy to engage with Russia and others because everybody thinks that development and the due and re-globalization have to be achieved through some way or the other. So while Russia will draw sustenance from the BRICS summit, it is important for BRICS members to each enjoy some sustenance from this. And I think in this, as I said earlier, India is the nuanced partner who does not want to indulge in bipolarization, but keep multipolarity at the core.
Yes, Greg, your thoughts?
Well, Russia has been transitioning towards a more global South orientation, not just since this year. It's been at least a decade, and one can even argue slightly longer. You just look at the foreign policy concepts which they've been producing. The West has been increasingly less relevant in the global South and more relevant. And I think if we are to look at Russia's relations with the global South, including India, this is more of a symbiosis. It's a symbiotic relationship, a win-win where both can get what they need and what they desire in a reciprocal and a relational manner. This differs completely from, for example, the US, which is a much more parasitic win-lose, zero-sum. For example, demanding that India drop all trade relations with Russia, but gives it nothing to replace those trade relations. Sir. It's a demand. So one can see where this is going. And I think Russia will continue this path. And India with Russia as an equal partner.
Okay. Yes. Professor Singh, with that, there is a sort of maybe writing on the wall, given the current context of the BRICS, that if you look at the members, the aspiring members and those who are already there, BRIC has it in it to shift or to sort of induce, if not shift, induce some sort of shift in the, current world order.
I will go a step forward.
But India will have a meaty role.
I will go a step forward and say it is already doing that. It's not that it will do the transformation in global financial decision making. It is already forcing Bretton Woods institutions to relook at the voting weightage, except that their strategy to do that is very different. They are doing it what they call equally proportional, that everybody gets a certain point added, rather than making it proportional to what the contributions the countries are bringing to the table. So in that sense, it is already compelling Bretton Woods institutions to seek out certain reforms. Of course, reforms in United Nations is a separate matter. We are only focusing on economic decision making. And the whole lot of initiatives, your program began by saying that, BRICS countries could, in this summit meeting, could also initiate some discussion on parallels to things like Western Union, money transfers. They could create they were talking about credit agency of their own earlier, partly because of the Ukraine crisis. Some of these initiatives have gone into a little deep freezer. They could come back again. Their new development bank is very successful. Yes. And the way they take decisions is very different. It's not based on how much of the stake each country has in the capital in the bank. It's more equitable decision making that takes place. They have opened a regional office in South Africa. About 15 plus countries have received all kinds of assistance from new development bank. And they have also the currency reserve pool, for example, in dealing with the sudden fluctuations in currencies around the world. So some of their decisions, especially the increase in their use of local currencies in their bilateral trade, that is a substantive step forward. So in that sense, incrementally by doing so many things, either within BRICS or BRICS collectively for rest of the world, they are already transforming global economic and financial transactions, trends and decision making, and that is what is forcing Bretton Woods institutions dominated by Western powers to also gradually, reluctantly, they are reticent, but they are trying to reform gradually themselves, not at the speed that BRICS nations want them to change. And if that doesn't happen, BRICS is creating parallel mechanisms of their own.
Okay, so can BRICS or is BRICS creating parallel mechanisms of their own? Now, that's a big question, and we're really looking forward to the Kazan Declaration. And talking about Kazan Declaration, my colleague Jessica once again joining us live from Kazan. Jessica, now over to you for some time now. Just give us a sense what's happening. The first plenary is underway, I believe, and the Prime Minister is expected to speak in second plenary and second session. And earlier when we were speaking to you, when you were telling our viewers, in fact, that there are more journalists from the Western world than from the BRICS. So the kind of international attention this BRICS has generated, Jessica, quite historic, as the old and the new leaders and those on the expanded list, when they converge and things that they talk about. Just give us a sense what's happening.
That's correct, and all around me there is a heavy media presence in order to understand what the outcomes would be of this, and eagerly awaited. Let's not forget, later in the afternoon, we have the most important bilateral meeting taking place between Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi along with the Chinese President Xi Jinping. And of course, that remains one of the highlights of the day, but also the fact that the BRICS mechanism has been able to offer an alternative to many nations. As many as, more than 30 countries have expressed interest. And to that effect, you heard the Foreign Secretary yesterday also said that the modality of, partner countries would be worked on. And with that was also discussed with the Prime Minister's meeting with President Putin yesterday. So, of course, that model, if that's included, would bring in India's significant contribution, apart from what already it has offered to the BRICS Multilateral Forum. But talking about the day moving forward and what all can we expect from the declaration, this could be one of them. However, the BRICS payment system, which Russia is hinting at, you heard from the Russian president as well, trading in local currencies remains to be of utmost importance. Finding an alternate payment mechanism will, of course, take time. But again, clarified by the Foreign Secretary yesterday that there is no alternative offered to SWIFT yet, or no adoption to a BRICS payment system has been agreed upon. So those details will have to be awaited. But when it comes to the Kazan Declaration, we could also expect more partner countries to join in. And we've heard that the countries like Vietnam, Thailand have also expressed interest in joining BRICS. We had the Turkish president also here, United Nations
Secretary General.
Pardon me, Secretary General Antonio Guterres is also here in Kazan. This is his first meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin since the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Yes, and that is also due to take place in the evening. But our focus remains to be, the kind of initiatives that India has taken so far. Now, for India, it is about establishing a multipolar world. And you heard Dr. Jaishankar also said just a short while ago that India is here to reaffirm the BRICS role in a multipolar world. It was reaffirmed at the UNGA as well, and again reiterated here at BRICS. So India's role or its contribution when it comes to BRICS is pretty much defined. It is not anti-Western, it is just non-Western, and continues to engage in various other multilateral forums, which is, of course, part of its foreign policy, that is strategic autonomy, and will continue to be that way.
Okay. Jessica, just stay with us. India's role is well defined. I want a quick thought on this. Ambassador Singh.
Yes, indeed. I think India's role is clearly defined. While we play for multipolarity, we also need to prevent bipolarity, which means we have to hold China in check. That's essentially what it means. While we hold the US in check, within BRICS, we can't let China run away with the BRICS ball. We need to make sure that other BRICS members are responsive to our views and we stick in the middle. So therefore, for instance, when you are creating the partner countries, there has to be an equitable view of all the 9 or 10 countries as to who will be members. It can't just be Chinese preferences.
Okay.
Similarly, on the agenda, like we call, this trading in local currencies. Yes, but just as we don't want dollar to remain the dominant currency, I also don't want the world to move to a yuan-based trading system. That is not in India's interest.
Yes.
So we have to keep staying in the middle. But I think beyond this, the new currency and all, I think it is also important that while we seek to amend how the World Bank and the IMF run, I think we need great improvements on how the NDB runs and how much it does. It is too small. Every country who joins BRICS must contribute to NDB, not only look to borrow from it. Similarly, the Asia Investment and Infrastructure Bank, I mean, China runs it pretty opaquely, and China is one of the worst lenders in the world. Its entire BRI has caused debt stress in most of the global south. It cannot evade that responsibility. So India's role, therefore, is clear. While we are trying to find solutions, let's say to debt stress of the global south, China also needs to become responsible for it. They normally keep away and say, we will do our own settlement. So China can't have it its own way, that I will join BRICS, I'll do what I want with BRICS, rest I will do on my own.
So the
India
question is who pushes, question is who pushes the button, and it's time to now walk the talk. We've been talking about this whole reforms at the WTO, Professor Singh, and reforms at the UNSC, where a certain country doesn't want it, it doesn't mean that we'll keep waiting and just talking about it. And today, the fact that, can we go to Jessica again, the fact that we are looking at this bilateral between President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi, I mean, not really, Jessica, what are you picking up? Not really jumping the gun or speculating, but what's the kind of buzz around? I mean, what do you pick up? You've been interacting with journalists from other nations as well. How are they looking at the two leaders meeting today?
Well, I won't presume or be speculative because this is a highly contentious, moment. We haven't had a bilateral meeting between Chinese President Xi Jinping and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi ever since the 2020 border standoff. And this particular moment has, at BRICS, a multilateral forum like this has provided an opportunity. But if you look at the recent past on the mechanisms that were in place to sort of ease tension slowly and gradually, there have been, I think, more than a dozen military level talks and, of course, visits. You saw the NSA also meet with his Chinese counterpart, Wang Yi, sometime back to work out on various particular details on how this particular bilateral meeting would go ahead and move forward. What we do understand, Sakal, is the fact that the most contentious point of the patrolling points and also the grazing areas that were agreed upon, goes back to the status quo as it was in 2020. Now, for how long does that continue, or whether the Chinese can provide a commitment? So there is, of course, a factor of trust deficit as well, because that remains to be seen. I mean, there can be agreements, normal trade can resume, commercial flights can resume. The business community has been demanding that the trade relations continue to smoothen, because that is something that would take the relationship forward. In China, a big industrial base, currently exporting deflation because of its own economic problems back home. But it should be, of course, a window of opportunity for both leaders. Now that the main issue of the border is resolved, remember, India for the last 4 years has been reiterating that the normal ties, be it in any sector, will not resume till the time the border issue is resolved. And India has stuck to that ground, and perhaps you could call it a significant breakthrough for Indian diplomacy that this has been achieved.
Okay, yes. Professor Singh.
I think this a lot is being made out of the bilateral that is going to happen between Indian Prime Minister and Chinese President, one has to put it into sort of perspective by looking at the complexities that exist. So yes, in the final 2 points on the line of actual control, Depsang and Demchok, what has been agreed upon is arrangements for patrolling and grazing rights, as was said. Lot is still left. Disengagement to actually be implemented, de-escalation to be achieved, then finally going back to the position of February 2020, then beginning to talk of peace and tranquility. So it's a lot of work still to be done, and together they're not just talking of bilateral problems on the border, they have other bilateral issues.
Yes.
Then they have responsibilities for the region, they have global responsibilities, but this you can call it a breakthrough that has made it possible for to have a formal bilateral meeting between President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Narendra Modi is a good inflection point to start afresh. And I go back to April this year was the first time Indian Prime Minister's interview in Newsweek had said we should leave the past for the past and look for future and begin to see how can we work together. And incrementally so many things have happened since then, and that is the kind of conclusion of that entire effort, that two leaders are beginning to meet. And my hope is the best they can do is, even if they don't publicize it, they can build an understanding if they can revive their informal summit meetings. Okay. That was the most innovative thing that India and China had achieved in entire history of international relations. No big two leaders had ever spoken of informal summits, no agenda, just beginning to share notes and develop a common understanding. It had produced good results. So even if it is not publicized, if they can develop an understanding of reviving informal summits, I think this meeting would be really fruitful for that.
So a very important inflection point, Ambassador Singh. What are your thoughts surrounding the bilateral between President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi?
So, Professor Taran Singh has rightly pointed out that this is the first window opening. Okay. The locked window has been opened. And now there have to be incremental steps, which we hope will take place without any further sliding. But I think, strategically speaking, it is extremely important that India and China restart the path to normalcy. Because when we were in a strained situation, we were becoming dependent more and more on other partners who were then starting to nudge you in directions you didn't want. That is why when India wants its strategic autonomy, it includes an ability to talk to China. And I think that is now being restored. And that will create more autonomous ways in which you deal with other partners who should not think that you are trapped in any situation.
Jessica, you would like to come in here? How is this and why is this so important for China as well?
Well, certainly you look at the economic downturn that China is facing right now. As I pointed out earlier, it's potentially exporting deflation. It is certainly something that the Chinese would also look at, but in India is a huge market, perhaps. So if once the trade ties resume, given that all goes well, I mean, that's far-fetched, to be honest, at this point. But if it does continue on that path, as Ambassador Singh pointed out, that would lead to a window of opportunity, not necessarily moving forward with all kinds of resumption of relationship. But yes, apart from the disengagement at the border, there are a lot of other bilateral issues that India and China would have to work on to continue to engage informally, which has to be consistent. And India and China share a border of 3,500 kilometers. We've seen skirmishes, not just once, but many times. In 2023, we heard reports of friction, 2020, 2017. So given all of these, developments in place, it is important that this relationship moves forward with a lot of caution, of course, from both sides, but also understanding and working together, creating a model where both could mutually benefit from a relationship that has not seen the kind of momentum it could have. But with the border issue still the resolution of the border issue still at its nascent stages, One will have to wait and see as to how the ties would be, normalized over the years. What course does it take? What are the agreements that are in place?
Right.
Whether the promises made to the Indian side are kept by the Chinese. Now, that will be something to watch for.
Yeah. Jessica, one final question before we leave you in this leg of the special broadcast. What are you picking up as far as the session is concerned, where our Prime Minister is going to speak, and there is obviously a lot of build-up as to what India is going to speak about and bring to the fore as far as the context and the theme of the this BRICS summit under Russia is concerned?
That's correct. For India, it would continue to focus on a multipolar world, inclusion of countries that have been left, outside the fold of the current financial order. You see, since the Second World War order that was constructed, many of the countries of the global South haven't been able to benefit or even receive that time of financial assistance. They've been largely neglected under the effects of the pandemic that had affected their economies beyond comprehension. And then you have two wars in Eurasia and then in West Asia. So, of course, that puts a lot of pressure on the countries of Global South. And India has been able to represent them, provide assistance, provide aid from time to time. And I think it's high time that, the world puts their attention back on the countries of the Global South and inclusion of looking at countries who need that kind of assistance and could be benefiting from an alternative structure, often neglected. And I think India's role would be to put their voice forward in a more effective manner.
Okay, and particular attention we also understand is going to be given to the potential expansion of the BRICS, Jessica, especially these partner nations that are concerned, the contours and the whole mechanism, how to go about it. Anything you want to add to that?
That's correct. I mean, you heard the Foreign Secretary yesterday who said, and I quote, that BRICS Summit, for us, the focus would be on establishing modalities and guidelines for implementing a partner country model, given the kind of interest we've seen from countries who wanted to join BRICS. India would certainly want to play a significant role. But of course, there are certain set criteria as well, especially economic criteria. But those particular modalities are still being worked on. So we'll have to wait and see, Sakal, as to how those details are firmed up.
Okay. Jessica, stay with us for some time. We'll come to you in a bit. Meanwhile, let me once again go back to Ambassador Singh and Professor Swaran Singh. Ambassador Singh, on that point on the establishment of the new category of partner nations, and now India has batted or will continue to bat for the inclusion of more members into the ambit of BRICS. Given that we've been discussing and this whole narrative of how India has been such an integral, part or a bridge between Global North and Global South.
In the creation of the category of partners, I think it is extremely important to have priorities and responsibilities of the new partners. And I would think that their contribution to BRICS, rather than simply drawing upon BRICS, must be confirmed. Now, when the expansion took place in Johannesburg, which was not partners, which was full members, I think somewhere we lost this narrative because we admitted countries without geographical balance, without further commitment to BRICS, and they all promised to abide by various things which BRICS stood for. For instance, supporting India, Brazil, South Africa for a permanent seat in the UN Security Council. And now Egypt and Ethiopia, after joining BRICS, don't want to say that anymore. So we have to be clear what we are getting into and what their commitments are. Now, the new members are not members, they are partners. I think there are 34 applicants, and all the 9 or 10, I don't know whether Saudi Arabia is a member or not a member, it's unclear to me. They are not at the table right now. So each one is going to pick 10, because that is the decision that there will be 10 partners added. So, and when you have the commonality of 10, between the 9 or 10 BRICS members, those 10 will be admitted. To my mind, other than Pakistan and Turkey, India would have no objection to any other. And therefore, it's difficult for us to choose 10. It's easy for us to choose who we don't want. But everybody else is our friend. Indonesia is our friend. Vietnam is our friend. Malaysia is our friend. Thailand is our friend. But of course, there are applicants like Cuba and Venezuela who are essentially coming on an anti-West platform. So I think we should favor those countries which can contribute and will, like India, be a West, not anti-West country.
Okay. Ambassador, there's also something interesting. Would you say that you have the UN Secretary General there? I think he's met Putin already, which is something which has not gone down well with Kyiv. I'm going to take that to you as well, but I just want his views on it. So UN's presence at the BRICS, and that too in Russia.
No, the problem with Ukraine, like the problem with Israel, they think that the UN Secretary General, if he talks to their enemy, is siding with. The UN Secretary General is supposed to talk to everybody. He is the UN agency's top diplomat. Diplomats have to talk to people. So I think it's very unfair for Ukraine to target him for this reason. I mean, if you stop talking to Russia, how are you ever going to have peace? So I think it is quite a silly argument to criticize him for being there.
It's not about criticism. Actually, in Ukraine, do you think Professor Singh he has a point when they say that, well, you didn't come to Ukraine Peace Summit, but you agreed to, I mean, just to understand the dynamics. I mean, India is neutral. India has always been neutral. Well, that is clear.
See, the clear aim of UN Secretary General addressing and meeting BRICS nations in the summit meeting is a clear focus on Ukraine crisis should come to an end.
Very clear.
That's his clear focus. And since in the Swiss summit, where he was also there, some of these nations were not even invited, others did not attend. A very important set of countries that have direct, intervention in that conflict. Russia directly is a party to the conflict, had no opportunity to have a conversation with UN Secretary General. So therefore, important for him not only have conversations with Western nations, but also have conversations with Russia, China and other stakeholders in the BRICS nations to find out how he can help develop that understanding where peace talks can become a possibility. India is at the center of that exercise today. So in that sense, India is doing, much more in terms of bringing, possibilities of some kind of peace talks. And I think there is a correlation here that Secretary General and Indian Prime Minister share that the aim of also working for bringing peace in Ukraine. So Indian Prime Minister is there for BRICS nations, for peace in Ukraine, for bilateral relations with Xi Jinping, resolving China-India relations. So it's a packed schedule in that sense, and that brings in India again and again into focus as to what is India bringing to the table, what is India trying to do in that sense. And I think that BRICS, because it is becoming extremely attractive, so many new nations wants to get into it, makes it an important platform for UN to engage them as well.
Yes. Jessica, Prime Minister Modi of India would be one of the very few leaders, world leaders, who have engaged with Russia in the very recent past, who have engaged with the Ukraine as well. And now Prime Minister is there in Russia for the summit, and so is the UN top body's chief there. So how does this really pan out? And Ukraine hasn't gone down well with Kyiv. But then what do you read as far as UN Secretary General's presence there? You spoke about it. I mean, I think they are scheduled to meet today. Jessica, can you hear us?
That's correct. At the moment, as you and I speak, Sakal, President Putin is right now addressing the session, and we'll try and understand as to what the meeting would be about. And we'll hear Prime Minister Modi as well in some time. I don't particularly have an update on whether he's had a meeting with the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres so far or not, but we will know that in a moment. Considered to be slightly contentious for the Ukrainian side, but again, as pointed out, just a short while ago, that the fact that the UN Secretary General would, irrespective, go and meet nations. I think that's what his position and his position at the United Nations would hold. So I think it's pretty normal. But there are countries whose sentiments are attached to various aspects of how this conflict has evolved over the years. So I think one should leave it at that, Sakal.
Yes. Okay. Jessica, you keep tracking more news updates and developments out there. In the meantime, I will give you a little bit of a breather to just get us some more inputs. I believe, as you just mentioned, that Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, and the BRICS chair is speaking, and it will be very interesting to note the points that he's going to put forward, because that's something that will set the tone. Jessica, thank you as of now, but we'll of course come to you. So now let's just take this discussion a little forward and talk about the theme this year and these pillars that have been identified by the chair, which is the practice.
Yes.
It is well timed, but then do you think this is also a little precarious for the Russia chairmanship or presidentship to navigate through some difficult conversations, because whether he likes it or not, but the war is still on, whether they call it an onslaught or an offensive or whatever, there has been a lot of bloodshed in the last 3 years. In both sides, because we are talking about humanitarian crises, because we have security on the anvil here, on the BRICS anvil.
Absolutely, because BRICS works on consensus. And if building consensus among 5 took so long, they had to speak, their Sherpas were talking for 2.5 years before the new members could be agreed upon. And Indonesia withdrew the nomination before they were invited to become member. Argentina's government changed. They said, we don't want to become members. Saudi Arabia is still studying various guidelines and criterion, has not yet become a full member. Now building consensus among 9 nations would be an important challenge for the host nation as to on how many issues they can ensure that consensus is built. Focus very clearly is to expand, not in terms of membership, but in terms of new nomenclatures of dialogue partners, special visitors, special invitees, observers. You remember India was an observer for quite some time on BRICS and then became a full member. So now the nomenclature is partners. I understand in the bilateral discussions between President Putin and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, they tried to discuss also as to what should be the criterion and guidelines to bring in new partner nations. That could also have been an issue in several other bilaterals that President Putin has had, and I'm saying could be an issue when Indian Prime Minister meets the Chinese President as well. So focus is, can we bring in some new nations who are aspirant, because right now after the last foreign ministers meeting, the membership, they have put a pause on the meeting as of now. So members are not going to be added. Partners likely to be added, because then those aspirant nations will continue to feel excited about, if not joining as members, at least aligning with BRICS, which is a thriving organization. So stay connected with that. And in that sense, I think challenges would be also in how to sustain that whole focus on multilateralism, ensure development, sustainable development is a major challenge. SSD goals are being derailed, and a whole lot of challenges in those sustainable development goals also. And then finally, security brings an issue of Ukraine, as you said. What is the mindset that each of these leaders...
Security is one of the pillars.
Absolutely. So
and humanitarian crisis.
Yes. So what each of the leaders are going to say today, I am assuming Indian Prime Minister is definitely going to underline issue of terrorism. He will indicate what are his thoughts on partners as to what should be the ways and whether should be bring in new partners. He's definitely going to underline sustainable development goals being derailed, and we need to work together. He's going to focus on global governance, particularly financial governance, I assume. And also finally, I think he's going to definitely bring in what can India bring to the table, because there are now increasing expectations from India as to what can India do on a multilateral forums like BRICS. So I assume there could be some indications, and in his speeches we very often hear very interesting abbreviations. So maybe we will see one more interesting abbreviation coming up in his speech in few hours. Since we
have a former diplomat on the show, let us also kind of elicit his thoughts on because Sir Ambassador Singh, if you were just hearing Professor Singh, We are standing by for the Prime Minister Modi's remarks at the closed plenary of the 16th BRICS Summit. Well, we are standing by for that. We're just going to break those inputs in a while. But Ambassador Singh, your thoughts? This BRICS Summit is historical in many ways for India and India's agenda setting.
Of all the things we have discussed, the one we have not discussed is financing. We want others to do, taking responsibility ourselves. We talk about the SDGs. Why not the BRICS funds to implement SDGs in the global south? And let India take the lead in that. Why must we give the lead to China? So I think when it comes to self-help, we must take the lead. And if India does that, we will be respected. Please remember that G7 countries are partners of India in Africa. The Quad countries are partners of India in ASEAN. In all this, China and Russia are not our partners. So we need to bring them into a partnership.
Now we'll get more, sir, we'll get more meat and substance to discuss, because we do have now the Prime Minister's remarks at the closed plenary of the 16th BRICS Summit. And I also take this opportunity to welcome Greg once again. So first of all, let's take a look at what India said at the BRICS Summit. Prime Minister started out by greeting the members, and he said that our meeting is taking place at a time when the world is facing several pressing challenges such as wars, economic uncertainty, climate change and terrorism. The Prime Minister also added that the world is also talking about the North-South divide and the East-West divide. That's what we also discussed in our studios. Preventing inflation, ensuring food security, energy security, health security, water security are the matters of priority for all countries in the world. That's what India has said. Now, in this era of technology, new challenges have emerged as cyber deepfake and disinformation. And at such a time, there are higher expectations of BRICS. Well, these are the pointers on your screen, the pointers of the plenary remarks made by Honorable Prime Minister of India. Preventing inflation, ensuring food security, energy security, health security, water security are the matters of priority for all. Prime Minister said that in this era of technology, new challenges have also emerged. Besides that, he has talked about the challenges of cyber deepfake and disinformation, pointed out by Prime Minister Modi, adding that there are high expectations of BRICS at this point, where BRICS can play a positive role in all these areas that have been defined above. Prime Minister said that our approach must remain people-centric. That's India's approach, to remain people-centric. We have to give the world the message that BRICS is not a divisive organization, but one that works in the interest of humanity. And Prime Minister also said that we support dialogue and diplomacy, not war. Well, that has been India's position. And just as we were able to overcome a challenge like COVID together, we are certainly able to create new opportunities to ensure a secure, strong and prosperous future for future generations. Prime Minister in his plenary also said that in order to counter terrorism, well, that's your point, counter terrorism and terror financing, we need the single-minded, firm support of all. There is no place for double standards on this serious matter. We need to take active steps to stop radicalization of youth in our countries. Points put forth by Prime Minister of India, adding that we must work together on the long pending matter in the United Nations of the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism. The same way, we need to work on global regulations for cybersecurity and, of course, for safe and secure artificial intelligence. So,
indeed, as I was listening,
I think it is very inclusive. It's very contemporary.
It's very inclusive. I was carefully listening to when you were telling the main points. I noticed that on development, Prime Minister's main focus has remained on well-being rather than looking at minimal agenda. He's looking at well-being focus of development.
Macro view.
And on security, he's focusing large areas of non-traditional security, including traditional terrorism was likely to be an issue there, but also on cyber security, health security and so on. So here the projection of where India wants to take BRICS is not just to focus on minimal requirements of humanity, but now focus on what much more can we brought to humanity in terms of their well-being, their progress, their development, their security, not just physical security, but civil security, health security, and so on. So I think it's a much more ambitious agenda, and very interesting that repeatedly underlined the focus on the convention that India has been pursuing at United Nations from 1994 to bring in a countering terrorism convention at the United Nations, which should define what is terrorism and as to then how to tackle terrorism collectively at the global level, because terrorism is not only one country's problem, it's every country's problem. We have seen even the most developed countries are also vulnerable to terrorism in that sense, and that has to be clearly the focus of BRICS nations collectively and take the matters to United Nations in that sense. So I think it's a fairly comprehensive, exhaustive items that are brought to focus by Indian Prime Minister, and in each of these then India also intends to make its own contribution, whether it is in terms of being the pharmacy of the world or being a country that is willing to freely share DPIs, digital public infrastructure, online payments, and all sorts of platforms that India has built in dealing with pandemic and so on, and dealing with deepfakes. I mean, that's another major issue Prime Minister has underlined for several years now. The deepfakes is another challenge, and particularly the public personalities, facing this challenge could lead to a whole lot of what WHO calls infodemics.
Yes.
Not just pandemics, but infodemics could result from deepfakes, and that's a major issue again Prime Minister has underlined for several years now, which again is underlined here. So I think it's a fairly exhaustive list of items that need to be attended and areas where India can contribute.
Yeah, let us quickly go to other panelists and also have their views in the same. Greg, coming to you, thank you again for joining. So, Greg, so this point on India pitching for an approach which is more people-centric, and the message to the world that BRICS is not a divisive organization, but one that works in the interests of humanity.
Well, I mean, I've been making these points already. So, I mean, this is just echoing what I've previously said. That
these are the points. I mean, I'm just trying to have your thoughts on Prime Minister's plenary remarks. Yes.
Yes, but this is echoing some of my earlier comments. This necessity for a human-centric, because, I mean, this is quite often forgotten in this day and age that, I mean, the center of relations and the kind of relations that are created is the human being, the personality behind that human, and who they interact with and how they interact. And I mean, it's quite interesting to see, I mean, because you've got about 30 countries at the Kazan summit, and I mean, you've had the UN Secretary General. So, I mean, you have a very inclusive meeting of different people, different interests, different approaches.
Right.
And I mean, this is how it should be. Even if a country does have some differences with another country, it doesn't and it shouldn't stop them having a dialogue and working on the things that they can mutually work on in a positive and constructive manner.
Yes.
I mean, as Putin said, I mean, he's with regards to Turkey, he says he doesn't exclude the idea of a NATO member country joining BRICS. But if you look at it the other way around, would the US and NATO accept Turkey? So you've got two different institutional cultures, if you want.
Ambassador Singh, your thoughts. There is a very clear mention of weeding out counter-terrorism and terror financing without taking names. Obviously, India says it needs a single-minded approach in that, and there is no place, quote-unquote, for double standards on this serious matter. We need to take active steps to stop radicalization of youth in our countries.
Very important. So, while on one side there are a lot of positives, the reference to youth, the reference to well-being, the reference to the various securities like energy and health, in food, which India could contribute to. This is perhaps one of the core concerns of India, because consistently China has dragged its feet, if not opposed, India and the world coming together on issues of terrorism and counter-terrorism in the United Nations, in BRICS, in SCO, everywhere. So what you see in PM statement is India playing this on the front foot now. They're not playing on the back foot. It is coming out straight and saying these are core interests. And when you read that out about double standard, that is a clear reference that you can't keep saying one man's terrorism, terrorist is another man's friend. Not
Correct.
acceptable.
Yes.
So I think there we are making it clear that we are going to push for our core interests in the Kazan declaration.
Yes, yes, yes. Professor Singh, there is also, I mean, would you like to come in there?
Yeah, sure.
We have more inputs coming in, but just...
Yeah, definitely. I think what we should also remember is there's a trio of Turkey, Malaysia, Pakistan, who are also trying to join BRICS, all three of them. And it may not be intended, but it has implications when we underline the issue of cross-border terrorism, terror financing and so on. Then should we have, sort of...
There are considerable amount of space given to this countering terror, financing
indeed,
terrorism
indeed.
and conventions at the UN.
Maybe there could be a thought behind it that Pakistan is pushing its own case to join BRICS. China would fully support it. Russia would be lukewarm.
But the name hasn't figured out yet.
Name has not figured out yet, but obviously this could have some implications to looking at whether we should think of Pakistan as a possible partner nation, if not member, or should we think of Malaysia. Turkey, of course, is being majorly debated. They are almost willing to counterbalance NATO in terms of by joining BRICS. So terrorism, as I said, is a global problem. India has been saying that from mid-1990s. It's not only India's problem. And therefore, there has to be collective effort at the United Nations. And Prime Minister has underlined it in almost all places wherever he has visited, in all the joint statements, in all his speeches. His concern for terrorism is always there. And I was expecting, but as you said, it's fairly in an exhaustive detail here.
And now coming to the other interesting aspect, Professor Singh, and I take this to others as well, but you first. India is ready to welcome new countries into BRICS, that on the expansion one, as partner countries. So India again having a very positive and inclusive approach as far as letting the other member nations being part of the BRICS ambit. Prime Minister said that in this regard, all decisions should be taken by consensus and the views of the BRICS founding members should be respected. BRICS founding members, for which India happens to be the founding members. The guiding principles, standards, criteria and procedures adopted during the Johannesburg summit should be complied with by one and all and partner countries.
Absolutely. So here it is an expression of intent. In principle, India is welcoming that new nations could, if not join, align. I mean, they may not become members, they could become partners, observers and so on. Right now we are using the word partners. So because there is such an upswing in the excitement of so many nations trying to join, there has to be some hope given to them. You cannot say that we have put a permanent...
And some mechanism also.
Absolutely. There has to be certain criterion, mechanism. Last time I said they took 2.5 years of negotiating as to what will be criterion to bring in new members. And that will be again followed. So in principle, Prime Minister has agreed he is more than willing to welcome new partners. But the whole consensus focus, the whole focus on guidelines and procedures means it's going to be something in the making over a coming period of time. But since the host country, President Putin, has put kind of this as a priority, important area to focus on, that we should have new partner nations, and Indian Prime Minister, has a very good close relationship with President Putin. And in that sense, it's supporting the host nation, that for the host nation, if this is an important agenda, then we would like to make sure India is publicly announcing its welcoming new members.
Let's once again go blow by blow and talk about the major takeaways and excerpts from the all-important intervention or Prime Minister's speech at the BRICS plenary. These are the high points on your screens. We go through each one of them very carefully. First of all, preventing inflation, ensuring food security, energy security, including health security, water security. These are the matters of top priority, matters that India accords top priority. Moving on next, there's a message for the world that BRICS is not a divisive organization. That's the point that we were just discussing, that BRICS grouping works in the interests of humanity. That's what Prime Minister Modi said in his plenary, and that India supports dialogue and diplomacy and not war, reiterating its earlier position. And the aim is to create new opportunities to ensure secure, strong and prosperous future. That's how India looks at BRICS and the contributions of BRICS as far as the world order is concerned. Moving to the next point, that there's a need for a single-minded approach and a firm support of all to deal with the counter-terrorism and terror financing. So weeding out terrorism and terror financing, where there is no place for double standards on this serious matter. India taking a strong position there. We must be united in raising our voices for reforms. Okay, for global institutions. India pitching for reforms of the global institutions. We must move forward in time-bound manner on reforms in global institutions like UNSC and WTO and institutions. Okay, there they are, UNSC, Multilateral Development Banks and WTO. That's there, pitching for reforms. And we must be careful of not becoming one that tries to replace global institutions. So setting the tone and correctly, we must be perceived as one that wishes to reform them and not to replace. Prioritize Global South hopes, okay, mention of Global South aspirations and expectations, given more credence to Global South aspirations, that BRICS grouping is a source of inspiration for the world. So this is more inclusive of the world approach, fostering positive cooperation across the globe, and the basis for our cooperation, the BRICS cooperation, should be diversity, respect for each other, as pitched by Prime Minister Modi of India, and our tradition of moving forward. Do we have more? We have some more points coming in. Okay, and confident that in times to come, we will together make this unique platform a model. This is in context of BRICS plus others for dialogue, cooperation and coordination. Okay, Ambassador Singh and Greg. Ambassador Singh, you first. So what's the underlying message here?
The underlying message is the world without want and a world which is not divided. And he has read the Riot Act to the Chinese and the Russians on international reform.
Yeah.
Abide by norms that we all agreed to, abide by the UN Charter, and don't go to war. These are very clear things. But yet, it also talks about reform of the WTO, which is, and the MDBs, which is actually looking at the G7. But I think, to me, what the nuance was, what you read out, that he said that the admission of partners should have the voice of the original members, the founding members of BRICS. Did he say that, or did he say all members of BRICS?
I'll just check.
Because if it is founding members, that means there are two categories of members, and now there will be a third category who are partners. Now, in the case of SCO, you had members, observers, and dialogue partners. The observers could graduate into partnerships, like India, Pakistan, Iran, Belarus did. But Mongolia and Afghanistan are still observers in SCO. But the dialogue partners don't graduate.
No, sir, it says the views of the BRICS founding members in this regard, all decisions should be taken by consensus, and the views of the founding members should be respected.
So that means what he's saying is that the views of the founding members should be given more weightage than the new members.
Yeah, yes.
Important.
And prior to that, there's a clear statement that India is ready to welcome the new countries into BRICS as partner countries. So India is open. Yeah.
We are ready to welcome new countries, but I have already mentioned the names of some countries who I don't think will meet with India's approval.
Okay. Greg, you want to come in here?
I mean, if we break it down, I mean, it's not only putting into words those, shall we say, legal imperatives and shall we say, legal priorities, but it's also talking about moral imperatives and moral priorities, and that these two somehow need to be aligned for a mutual beneficial outcome for everyone. This inclusivity, this security and stability and so forth. But of course, if we get into geopolitics and realism and these kinds of things, the world doesn't work that way, unfortunately, at this stage. And this is what is driving those points of instability and insecurity, which is a threat not only to the country concerned, but more widely, because things can soon exacerbate. I mean, if we look at the recent regime change in Bangladesh, I mean, this started somewhat innocently, but I mean, it's taking some rather problematic direction, shall we say. And this is not only an issue for Bangladesh, but it's also more broadly for India and neighboring countries.
You know, but that line, Greg, there is no room for double standards. Where India has a stern position on terror, weeding out terror and weeding out terror financing.
I mean, morally speaking, that's absolutely correct. But if we look at it, I mean, this is coming to the point where they exploit terrorists for geopolitical advantage. I mean, if we look what's happening in Libya, happened there, what's happening in Syria, I mean, you have different powers that make use of these groups for their own advantage. Of course, India is also a victim of terrorist groups that are supported by external powers for their own advantage.
What do you make of India once again pressing for reforms in the world bodies like UNSC, WTO, etc.? Greg?
Well, I mean, this has been a call not only made by India, but I mean, it's becoming much more common because, I mean, how much does the UN in its current form represent adequately the interests and the priorities of the global south? I mean, as has been noted on your program, I mean, India is a pivotal regional, I'd say, even global country, yet it has no seat on the Security Council, for example. And you have all of these points which have been reiterated by various countries from the global south. And one can even say that these, I think they have a lot of valid points for that. It does need reform because it's been something which has been created in a whole entirely different geopolitical order. And the realities have changed vastly from when it was created and was designed to cope with,
and lot of water
currently in existence.
And as the cliche goes, Greg, a lot of water has passed into the bridge, you know, then and now, and it's a different world. And it is a different world where India has certainly taken center stage in many matters in the current context. Ambassador Singh, sir, you've in your diplomatic career, you must have maybe part of, you know, or perhaps you must have drafted many what you call, you know, drafts of the declarations, etc. What do you make of the messaging as far as India is concerned, the overall? I mean, there are many aspects that Prime Minister has touched upon, but overall, if you have to sum it up, like what is the larger message as far as India at the Russia summit is concerned?
So, the Prime Minister's message, which you have summarized, the statement today, I think is among the better crafted messages, particularly given the fact that BRICS is at a delicate point and there's much attention focused on it. So I think it's a very well crafted message, clearly talking about a larger world beyond what China or Russia imagines it to be, but also a world which is responsive to Indian interests. So I think that is brought out clearly. Now, regarding the Kazan declaration which will come out, I think negotiators by and large try and stick to previously agreed upon positions so that they don't have to renegotiate them.
Okay.
But then on new issues, they bring in language which is current. For instance, on Ukraine or on Gaza, there would be new language. But sometimes what happens is that countries like China will reopen previously agreed language. You've done it for 3 summits, but now they say we don't want. So what is happening now, since India is not the chair and therefore is not responsible for building the consensus, India lays its own red lines. And says, these I will not agree to if you try and pass. So I think that puts the pressure on the host. You know, we had this pressure when we hosted BRICS some years ago. 2 years ago, I think. I mean, when the Chinese were being obdurate, we had no choice but to dilute previous positions. But subsequently, we have gone back to the correct position. So that is the diplomacy which comes in at the time of negotiating the declaration.
Professor Singh.
I think I agree with Ambassador Singh. Surely the language that has been agreed upon in preceding joint statements would be reflected. But each host nation also tries to showcase the distinction that it brings to bear on joint statement. I think some common language on what kind of new partners and how new partners would be inducted in coming times could be something added as.
But it says consensus as far as the founding members.
So that is what the effort is, and I think India is trying to not just be there as a member but also help facilitate for the host how to build consensus, and therefore that statement that India would welcome new partners and discussions on criterion and guidelines and so on is an indication as a major power in BRICS nations as to what India thinks wants to be added as a new element to the joint statement. Of course, all the other areas of cyber security, climate change, terrorism, inflation, people to people relations, these things all will be there. But I think among new things could be the language on security. We want to see what is the new language on security,
the language
on humanitarian assistance, on crisis, wars, conflicts. What is the new language that Russia wants to bring in the joint statement would be very interesting. What China wants to bring in terms of global financial governance could be interesting. India's focus largely is inclusive, global, futuristic. That is how India's speech, as it appears to me, the way you explained us, appears to be. And where does India sees itself contributing? So in technology sectors like critical and emerging technologies, India is well placed to contribute. In health sector, India is well placed to contribute. India has been a constant, flag bearer of countering terrorism issues, and of course the whole issue of how to achieve the expansion without, opening up membership at this stage, because the last membership process is still on. Saudi Arabia is yet to join, and we don't know what happens to Argentina in that sense. So, not to put a halt to new nations who want to join and align with BRICS nations. So, I think there are multiple ways India has tried to project as to how India can contribute in building that consensus for the joint statement.
We were discussing that BRICS coming up as an alternative to the global bodies or counterbalancing the world order. Now, if you look at this line where Prime Minister says that our approach, which means India's approach, must remain people-centric, adding that the BRICS, the message that should go out is that BRICS is not divisive organization.
Absolutely.
Not divisive, but that works in the interest of humanity. So the element of inclusivity.
Absolutely. And that is the whole focus repeatedly. Dr. Jaishankar, the foreign minister, has explained it is non-Western, it is not anti-Western. This is something popularized by Dr. Jaishankar, that India sees BRICS, not all members see it that way. Maybe China and Russia looks at BRICS in a slightly different fashion as an alternative to West. But India doesn't see it that way. India is focused on how it can do the bridge building between East and West, North and South, bring in global South to the center stage the way India did in the global G20 summit meeting last year. So reformation, again, when Prime Minister says need to reform global institutions, is not limited to myopic India-centric approach. Indian Prime Minister is looking at how we can accommodate global institutions becoming more representative, which is where global South comes in. should Africa who should have a seat also on the big table of UN Security Council. So I think India is no longer
well,
myopic.
we gave that seat to Africa during G20, and
Absolutely.
that sets the,
in fact, Saril, I often now say the onus is no longer on India. Onus now is on UN Security Council to become representative of the world we live in. India outside is a question on credibility of UN Security Council rather than a question on India today. So India is not looking at reformation of global institutions in terms of what India is going to get. India is looking at global good and people-centric approach where we should have institutions that really represent the issues and stakeholders of the time we live in, rather than continue to live in 20th century, which is not going to make them effective. And we have seen United Nations losing that efficacy over a period of time, whether it is in West Asia or in Ukraine.
So we are looking at India pitching for reforms